Now, I am well aware that most of us do not know what it's like to be hungry or thirsty. I do not want to cheapen or to denigrate poverty, but I am grateful that I'm a part of a fellowship that a long time ago left the confining interpretation of either or and invited us into the grace-filled experience of both and. We are at our best when we follow the commandment of Christ, we take a risk, and we find friends along the way. In our time together here over these last few days, we have celebrated well our 20-year history. We remember that 20 years ago, we gathered together and we dared to take a risk, to leave the denomination that cared for us, that birthed us. That denomination was comfortable for a while. It gave us our Sunday school quarterlies. It helped us send missionaries. It educated our students for ministry. But somewhere along the way, it changed. And we believed that to be consistent with the mission of God, we must risk. And ours is a 20-year story of friends who have walked along beside us, friends that we didn't even know we had, as we have dared to risk for the gospel. Every speaker, or most every speaker, has made use of the analogy or comparing the fellowship to a 20-year-old. Now it's my turn. We're 20 years old, and in the life of a typical 20-year-old, we're not only declaring our major, we're beginning to take classes consistent that will help us to gain that degree. In a few years, we're going to hang a diploma on our wall. We're going to buy a home, and we're going to begin to collect our first paycheck. Compared to our teenage years, 20-somethings seem to offer stability for the first time in our lives. And so I think, if I understand that at all, that it creates a tension for us who on the one hand have been at our best when we have been willing to take a risk for the gospel, who on the other are going into those years of stability. We have staying power, if you will. How are we, to be consistent with this text and consistent with our history, going to make sure that we are a people who will risk and find new friends along the way? One way, I think, is to remember that we are a fellowship not only of individual Christians, but a fellowship of local churches. And local churches are doing amazing things, taking risks, seeking to live and proclaim the message of the risen Christ. And in our life together, we must remember the local church, and we must be a resource for them. We must be a friend to them. We must walk alongside them, and yes, we must tell their stories. To be faithful to this risk-filled gospel mission, we must be about equipping and celebrating the local church. And if we are faithful and continue to take risks, I think our history and experience tells us that we are going to attract new generations of women and men who are drawn to our way of being Christian in the world. And if we are faithful to this call, if we take risks that are intrinsic in the gospel, we must deal with this question: how will we my brothers and sisters of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, interpret for them our history and tell them our story. I think we must commit together to tell more of our story regarding why we left than who we left. The time is right for us to share the story of the brokenness and pain of our former life, and yet there was a clear gospel call that called us to leave the comfortable, to take a risk, and to celebrate the friends that we have made along the way. Ours is a remarkable history and story, but more than the pain and brokenness, we must bring out that this movement began as a call of God seeking to be faithful to the way of Christ in the world. I love the story that Bishop William Willimon tells. A bishop in the United Methodist Church, he was invited to go to one of those downtown churches to offer a blessing and a word of encouragement to a new ministry center that was opening within that church. Willimon said he walked in and he was greeted by the least of these, those who were hungry and homeless. And he learned the story of that remarkable church. They were going to do job training. They were going to feed. They were going to do all the things that we think are such a part of the gospel. And so when the program began, Willimon said he stood up and he said, "This is a model for what we want to be and do. We're going to help you find job skills. We're going to help you find a home. We're going to help you do all of the things that will empower you to be productive citizens in the world." He said he noticed that in the back of the room, a man raised his hand. And though he tried to ignore him, he finally said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Tell me one thing, Bishop. Where does it say in the Bible that Jesus ever had a job?" Willimon said, "Well, we get from the text that Joseph was a carpenter, and we know that there were various building projects going on in nearby Sepphoris, and so we tend to believe that Jesus probably had a job working with his Father." The man would not be deterred. He raised his hand again. "Where in the Bible," he said, "does it say that Jesus ever had a home?" And Willimon said, "Well, you've got me there. The birds of the air have nests, foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." As far as we can tell, he was homeless. The man in the back stood up and said, "Well, thank you very much for your offer, but if it's all the same to you, I'm going to go be with Jesus." And he walked out. To be with Jesus, to take a risk for God's mission in the world, for that mission to become our passion, to take a risk, inviting others and experiencing friends who will join us along the way. God bless you, Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. May our next 20 years be blessed. Amen.